Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I'm here on beautiful Table Rock Lake. It's the middle of August, so it's pretty hot out. And a lot of the fish are deep. I'm fishing a deep point right now. I've got some brush, some rocks scattered on it. You can see we've got a nice point behind me right here. And I'm sitting shallow, throwing out. And that's something that I think is really important, is to fish your baits uphill. You know, I can't tell you how many times over my career, a little bit of background story on this. Early in my career, I was fishing a bunch of points. I remember it was like one of the first times we went to Beaver Lake, probably 10 years ago. I had a rough day on the water for one of my practice days. And I went back and I was talking to one of the other pros. And the other pro was, telling me, how deep are you fishing? And I told him, how deep I was fishing, which was like 15 to 20 feet. And they're like, well, the fish are sitting at 20 feet. And I'm like, yeah, I know, I see them on the graph. And one of the issues I had was because I was throwing up, I really wasn't working my back to 20 feet. This was before forward facing sonar, so I didn't know exactly how deep I was getting my bait. A lot of times we make a cast that's further than we think, and I was realistically working my bait from like 10 to 15 feet. And what that did is that meant I was bringing my bait to about where the fish were, and then I was reeling it in. So I actually was pulling it away from the fish, and that was hurting me. That individual I was talking to, another top level pro, was like, you should try working your bait uphill. And I was like, well, what do you mean by uphill? And they said, go shallow, throw down the point, and work your bait back up the point. That way, you're throwing your bait into deeper water and bringing your bait back. And that's exactly what I'm doing in this case to generate some strikes. I'm sitting here, I'm in about 13 feet of water, and I'm throwing out to 35. And the reason that's important is the fish are holding from 20 to 25. There's a thermocline that's right at about 25 feet, which is where the bait's gonna be at. So I wanna make sure I'm working my bait through that zone. So I'm actually casting past it. So I know my bait's gonna be in that 30 to 35 foot range, and then I'm working this hair jig, which is what I'm throwing here. I'm working it back to me. So I know that I'm actually bringing my bait through that specific target zone, which is what I'm looking for. It's a really important key to generating some of those strikes, because so many times we're not keeping our bait in the strike zone. We think we are, but we don't. With forward facing sonar, if you're lucky enough to have one of those units, you can see at what depth your bait is. You can see where it is compared to the fish that are out there. So that's definitely an advantage to have. But realistically here, the majority of us are not working the bait to where the fish are at. This is a common thing. If you fish Tennessee River ledges, you're throwing up on top of the ledge, you work it down the break. But if those fish are sitting at the bottom of that drop, at the bottom of that ledge, a lot of times we don't actually work our bait to it. So if you sit on top of the ledge, throw off into the river channel, work your bait back up, you've got both the opportunity to catch a fish at the bottom of the ledge, which is where a lot of your inactive fish are going to be. And at the same time, when you bring your bait up the ledge and crest onto the top flat, that's also when you're going to have an opportunity to get striked. So your bait's going to be in the two best zones to get bit if you work your bait uphill. It's much harder to do that if you're working from a deeper water casting into shallower. At the same time, if you're working a bottom bait, it's really a good way to maintain bottom contact the entire time as well. So those are couple of keys. There's also an advantage in this case. It's still early on a Friday, but there's a lot of boat traffic. We've got a lot of wave action, and I don't have much in terms of wind blowing me in a direction. So I want to be facing into those boat waves because they continuously are trying to push me into shore. So by being shallow and casting out, I don't have to worry about the waves pushing me onto the bank. And also with that, a lot of times those fish aren't going to be on these shallow flats when you have that big wave action that continues to push up onto them. So they're going to drop down into that deeper level, which again puts my bait in the strike zone. So these are important things to remember, that your uphill fishing can generate additional strikes.